Silver duct tape circled Zoe Chen's ankles, wrists, and torso, binding her to the metal folding chair in the center of Riverside High's empty gymnasium. 3 seniors stood around her like predators circling wounded prey, phones recording every angle while the head cheerleader, Brittany Walsh, slowly peeled another strip of tape with the satisfied smile of someone who'd been planning this moment for weeks. The sound echoed through the space like ripping fabric, and Zoe's dark eyes tracked each movement with the stillness of someone calculating distances, angles, and escape routes. What none of them knew was that beneath her oversized hoodie and quiet demeanor, Zoe had spent the last 8 years training in 3 different martial arts disciplines. They thought they were taping down a helpless new girl. They had no idea they were about to unleash something they couldn't control. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The move-in truck had pulled away from the Chen family's new house on Maple Street just 3 weeks earlier, leaving behind tire tracks in the driveway and the hollow feeling that comes with starting over in a place where everyone already knows each other's secrets. Riverside was one of those towns where your reputation got decided in elementary school and stuck like permanent marker through graduation. Zoe understood this the moment she walked through the doors of Riverside High on that first Monday morning. In October, backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds blocking out the whispered commentary that followed her down the hallway. Her father, David Chen, worked as a translator for the State Department, which meant the family moved every few years chasing new assignments. Her mother, Dr. Sarah Chen, could set up her pediatric practice anywhere, but Zoe had learned that being the perpetual new kid required a different kind of adaptability. In Beijing, she'd started learning Wing Chun from a grandmother who taught classes in the park at dawn. In Bangkok, a former Muay Thai champion had noticed her practicing forms and offered private lessons. In Snow Paulo, she discovered Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at a gym where no one cared that she didn't speak Portuguese as long as she could hold her own on the mats. Each move taught her something new about blending in while staying ready. The trick was to appear unremarkable while maintaining the awareness that kept you alive in unfamiliar territory. At 17, Zoe had perfected the art of being invisible, which made her fascinating to people who thrived on being seen. Brittany Walsh was definitely someone who thrived on being seen. Student body president, captain of the varsity cheerleading squad, and daughter of the town's most prominent real estate developer, she commanded Riverside High the way generals commanded armies. Her blonde hair caught sunlight like a beacon, and her laugh carried across courtyards with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. She dated Tyler Morrison, the basketball team captain whose family owned the largest car dealership in 3 counties, and together they formed the nucleus around which the school's social universe revolved. Zoe's first mistake was sitting at the wrong lunch table. Not that anyone had posted signs or handed her a map, but apparently the round table by the windows belonged to Brittany's inner circle, and newcomers were expected to understand these invisible boundaries through some kind of social telepathy. Zoe had simply seen an empty chair, set down her brown bag lunch, and started reading while she ate her sandwich. The conversation around her gradually died until the only sound was the turning of pages and the distant noise from other tables. When Zoe finally looked up, 5 pairs of eyes were studying her with the kind of attention usually reserved for laboratory specimens. Brittany leaned forward, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "I don't think we've met," she said, though her tone suggested this wasn't an oversight she was eager to correct. "I'm Brittany Walsh. This is my table." The emphasis on my hung in the air like a challenge. Zoe glanced around at the empty chairs, then back at Brittany. "There's room for everyone," she said simply, returning to her book. Later, Zoe would realize this was her second mistake. In Brittany's world, challenges to authority weren't met with reasonable discussion. they were met with systematic destruction. It started subtly. Zoe's locker combination stopped working, requiring embarrassing trips to the main office for help. Her car tires developed mysterious leaks that left her stranded after school. Someone created fake social media accounts in her name and used them to send inappropriate messages to teachers and classmates. The harassment was sophisticated, coordinated, and designed to isolate her completely. Most students learned to navigate around Brittany's wrath, but Zoe had spent years in international schools where she'd seen every variation of adolescent cruelty. She recognized the pattern and began documenting everything with the methodical precision her father used when building cases for diplomatic incidents. Screenshots, photographs, detailed logs with timestamps. Evidence that told a story, even when witnesses chose to stay silent. Her only ally emerged from an unexpected source. Marcus Thompson was Riverside High's debate team captain, a scholarship kid from the east side of town who'd earned his place through academic excellence rather than family connections. He'd watched Brittany's campaign against Zoe with the same analytical interest he brought to tournament research, and something about the new girl's refusal to break impressed him. Marcus found her in the library one afternoon, surrounded by textbooks and wearing the kind of focused expression that kept other students at a distance. He slid into the chair across from her and opened his laptop without saying anything. After 20 minutes of comfortable silence, he finally spoke. "She's planning something bigger," he said quietly, not looking up from his screen. "Brittany. I heard her talking to Tyler about some kind of public humiliation. Something about teaching you your place." Zoe set down her pen and studied his face. Marcus had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and calloused hands that suggested he worked somewhere after school to help support his family. He reminded her of kids she'd known in other cities, the ones who understood that respect had to be earned rather than inherited. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Marcus glanced around the library, making sure they were alone before leaning closer. "Because I was the new kid once too. 3 years ago when my mom got laid off and we had to move in with my grandmother on this side of town. Brittany made those first few months hell until I proved I could be useful to her." His fingers drummed against the table. "I've been collecting information ever since, waiting for the right moment to use it." He pulled out his phone and showed Zoe a folder labeled with innocuous homework titles. Inside were recordings, screenshots, and documents that painted a picture of systematic harassment spanning years. "Brittany doesn't just target new kids randomly. She goes after anyone who threatens her control, but she's careful to make it look spontaneous. The locker thing, the tire slashing, the fake accounts, they're all part of a playbook she's refined over time." Zoe studied the evidence on his screen. The precision was impressive in its cruelty. How many others? 17 students over the past 3 years. Most transferred schools. 2 dropped out entirely. One girl, Samantha Torres, ended up hospitalized after what Brittany called a harmless prank involving peanut oil and a severe allergy. Marcus's voice hardened. The school administration buried it. Samantha's family couldn't afford lawyers, and the Torres family got transferred by his company conveniently soon after. The casual mention of near-fatal harassment sent ice through Zoe's veins. This wasn't typical teenage drama. This was predatory behavior enabled by institutional protection. "What's she planning for me?" Marcus pulled up a group chat screenshot. "Something called Operation Spotlight. They're planning to humiliate you publicly during the winter formal assembly next Friday. Everyone will be there, including parents and faculty. Whatever they're planning, it's designed for maximum audience impact." Zoe absorbed this information while calculating her options. Running wasn't appealing after 3 weeks of careful positioning, and transferring schools would only validate Brittany's methods. Her parents would support whatever decision she made, but they'd also taught her that sometimes you had to take a stand not just for yourself, but for everyone who came after you. "I need details," she said quietly. Everything you can find out about timing, location, participants. Can you do that? Marcus nodded slowly. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Brittany Walsh has never encountered real resistance before. It's time she learned what that feels like. Over the next week, Marcus proved invaluable as an intelligence source. His debate team connections gave him access to different social circles, and his reputation as a harmless academic meant people spoke freely around him. Piece by piece, he assembled the plan. Brittany intended to strike during the winter formal assembly, when the entire school would be gathered in the gymnasium to vote on dance themes and court nominations. She'd convinced Tyler and 2 other basketball players, Jake Morrison and Connor Reed, to help with what she called a citizenship lesson for the new girl who didn't understand Riverside hierarchies. The plan was elegantly simple. During the chaos of court nominations, they would isolate Zoe under the pretense of needing her help with decorations in the storage room adjacent to the gym. Once there, they'd restrain her with duct tape and wheel her out on a chair for the entire assembly to see, humiliating her in front of students, teachers, and visiting parents. She's calling it taping the mouth that won't learn, Marcus reported during one of their library meetings. Tyler thinks it's hilarious. He's been telling people she's going to make you into a human decoration. Zoe felt the familiar calm that preceded combat. Her Muay Thai instructor in Bangkok had taught her that anger was a luxury fighters couldn't afford. Emotion clouded judgment, slowed reactions, created openings for opponents. The key was to channel that energy into focused preparation. They're underestimating basic physics, she said, studying the gymnasium layout Marcus had sketched. Duct tape has specific tensile strength. It binds effectively against direct pulling, but it's vulnerable to rotational stress and sharp pressure. Points. Marcus looked confused. You're talking about this like it's a math problem. Everything's a math problem if you approach it correctly. Zoe pulled out her own notebook, filled with diagrams and calculations she'd been working on since learning about Operation Spotlight. Tape around wrists and ankles in a standard restraint pattern creates leverage points here and here. The chair they're planning to use, standard metal folding chair from the storage room, has weak points in the joint construction. She'd spent hours in the empty gymnasium after school, ostensibly working on makeup assignments, but actually studying the space, testing acoustics, identifying sightlines and exit routes. The layout favored her plan perfectly. Marcus, I need you to position yourself with your phone ready to record everything from the moment they wheel me out. Can you do that without looking suspicious? Recording them committing assault in front of the entire school, Marcus grinned. I think I can manage that. Good. And I need one more thing. Can you get word to Principal Davidson that he should pay special attention to the storage room area during the assembly? Don't be specific, just suggest he might want to keep an eye on things. Marcus nodded, then hesitated. Zoe, what exactly are you planning? Because if you're thinking about fighting them, Tyler and his friends are big guys. And Brittany fights dirty. Zoe closed her notebook and looked at him directly. I've been fighting my whole life, Marcus. Different countries, different bullies, same basic dynamics. The mistake people make is thinking size matters more than technique, or that dirty fighting gives you an advantage over someone who actually knows what they're doing. She stood up, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. Brittany Walsh has spent 4 years terrorizing people who couldn't fight back. She's about to learn the difference between picking on the helpless and challenging someone who's been waiting for this opportunity. The week passed with agonizing slowness. Brittany ramped up the psychological pressure, having her followers spread rumors about Zoe's family, making sure she overheard cruel comments about foreigners and outsiders. The harassment was designed to either break Zoe's spirit or provoke her into a reaction that would justify escalation. Instead, Zoe used the time to fine-tune her preparation. She practiced specific movements in her bedroom, testing range of motion while simulating restraints. She studied videos of pressure point techniques and reviewed joint manipulation principles she'd learned in different dojos. Most importantly, she visualized the entire sequence from multiple angles, accounting for variables and planning contingencies. Her parents noticed her increased focus during their nightly check-ins, but attributed it to normal adjustment stress. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dr. Chen offered to schedule a meeting with school counselors, while David suggested they consider other school district options if Riverside wasn't working out. Zoe assured them everything was fine, that she was just concentrating on making the best possible impression at the upcoming assembly. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of October weather that made everyone eager to get indoors. The winter formal assembly was scheduled for last period, meaning the entire day felt like a countdown. Zoe moved through her classes in a state of heightened awareness, noting which of Brittany's circle seemed nervous, which teachers appeared distracted, and how the general energy of the school shifted as the day progressed. During lunch, Brittany made her final move. She approached Zoe's table with Tyler in tow, wearing the smile she reserved for public consumption. "Zoe, I wanted to apologize for any misunderstandings we've had. I know starting at a new school can be really difficult." Several students turned to watch this unexpected display of magnanimity. Brittany was performing for an audience, setting up the narrative that would make the afternoon's humiliation even more devastating. "I was hoping you might help us with decorations for the assembly this afternoon. We could really use someone with your attention to detail." Zoe looked up from her sandwich, meeting Brittany's eyes with an expression of mild interest. "What kind of help do you need?" "Just setting up some displays in the storage room. It won't take long, and it would mean a lot to the student council." Brittany's voice carried just the right note of hopeful sincerity. "Sure," Zoe said simply. "What time?" Brittany's smile widened, though something predatory flickered behind her eyes. "Right before the assembly starts. Tyler will come get you from your last period class." As they walked away, Zoe heard Tyler mutter something about making this memorable, followed by Brittany's low laugh. She finished her lunch methodically, checking her watch and running through her mental checklist one final time. In 3 hours, one way or another, this would be over. The final period crawled by with excruciating slowness. Zoe sat in AP chemistry, nominally paying attention to Mr. Patterson's lecture on molecular bonds, while actually controlling her breathing and maintaining the mental calm she'd need for what was coming. When Tyler appeared in the doorway with a hall pass, her pulse didn't even quicken. "Miss Chen? You're needed in the gymnasium for assembly setup." She gathered her materials with deliberate care, met Marcus's eyes across the room for just a moment, and followed Tyler into the hallway. Behind them, she could hear Mr. Patterson directing the class to finish the chapter, while he escorted them to the assembly in 10 minutes. Tyler led her through corridors that grew emptier as they moved away from the main academic areas. His swagger had an edge of anticipation that confirmed this wasn't routine volunteer work. When they reached the storage room adjacent to the gymnasium, Brittany was waiting with Jake and Connor, all wearing expressions of barely contained excitement. "Thanks for coming, Zoe," Brittany said, stepping aside to reveal the metal folding chair positioned in the center of the small room. Rolls of silver duct tape sat on a nearby shelf like props waiting for their cue. "We've got something really special planned for you." The storage room smelled like old basketballs and industrial cleaner, with fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across stacked wrestling mats and volleyball nets. Zoe stepped inside with the measured pace of someone walking into a familiar situation, her eyes cataloging exit routes, weapon possibilities, and the positioning of her 4 opponents. Tyler closed the door behind them with a soft click that echoed louder than it should have in the confined space. "So here's the thing. New girl, Brittany said, picking up the first roll of duct tape and examining it like fine wine. Riverside has traditions. Ways of doing things that work for everyone when people understand their place. You've been here 3 weeks and you still don't seem to get it. Jake Morrison cracked his knuckles with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been looking forward to this moment. At 6'4" and built like the power forward he was, he clearly expected this to be over quickly. Connor Reed positioned himself by the door, though whether to prevent escape or interruption wasn't clear. Tyler remained near the chair, running his hands along its metal frame like he was testing its sturdiness. "See, when someone new comes to our school," Brittany continued, slowly peeling the end of the tape loose, "they usually have the sense to observe how things work before trying to change them. But you walked right into our space, sat at our table, and acted like you belonged there." Zoe shifted her weight slightly, settling into a stance that looked casual but optimized her balance and reaction time. "I sat at an empty table to eat. Lunch. That's not exactly revolutionary behavior." "Everything's revolutionary when you don't have permission," Tyler said, stepping closer. "Time for your citizenship lesson." They moved with the coordination of people who discussed this extensively. Jake grabbed for her left arm while Connor came around to secure her right, clearly expecting her to struggle uselessly while they overpowered her with superior size and numbers. Tyler reached for her legs to force her into the chair, and Brittany held the tape ready to begin the binding process. What they didn't expect was for Zoe to step backward into Tyler's reach while simultaneously grabbing Jake's extended wrist with both hands. The Wing Chun redirection technique sent Jake stumbling forward off balance, directly into Connor, who was moving in from the opposite direction. The collision sent both boys sprawling into the stacked volleyball nets with a crash that rattled the metal shelving. Tyler, suddenly finding himself supporting all of Zoe's weight as she dropped into a controlled fall, lost his footing and went down hard with her controlled descent, driving her elbow into his solar plexus. The impact knocked the wind out of him in a loud whoosh, and by the time he registered what had happened, Zoe was already rolling away and back to her feet. "What the hell?" Brittany sputtered, the tape still hanging from her hands as she stared at her 3 male accomplices tangled in sports equipment. "Get up! All of you, get up and grab her!" But Zoe wasn't where she'd been a moment before. She'd positioned herself near the shelving unit, giving her access to improvised weapons and limiting their ability to surround her. Jake untangled himself. First, his face flushed with embarrassment and growing anger. "You got lucky," he growled, flexing his shoulders. "That's not happening again." This time he approached more cautiously, hands up in a wrestling stance that made use of his reach. Advantage. Connor flanked from the left while Tyler, still wheezing slightly, moved to cut off her retreat toward the door. They'd learned from their first mistake and were treating her like an actual opponent rather than a helpless victim. Zoe waited until Jake committed to his grab before slipping under his arms and driving her knee up toward his midsection. He managed to twist away from the worst of it, but the impact still doubled him over enough for her to grab his shoulders and bring her knee up again, this time connecting solidly with his chest. The Muay Thai technique sent him staggering backward into Connor, who caught him but couldn't prevent both of them from crashing into the door. Tyler had learned to be wary of her ground fighting, so he tried to grab her from behind in a bear hug that would immobilize her arms. But Zoe had spent hundreds of hours drilling escapes from exactly this position in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu classes. She dropped her hips, grabbed his wrists, and stepped to the side while pulling his arms apart. The leverage broke his grip easily, and she spun into an elbow strike that caught him in the ribs with a solid thunk. "Stop playing around!" Brittany shrieked, her carefully constructed plan dissolving into chaos. "There are 3 of you. Just hold her down." But the 3 boys were discovering that size and strength mattered less than they'd assumed when facing someone who actually knew how to fight. Every time they thought they had her cornered, She moved in ways they didn't expect. Every grab attempt met empty air or sudden painful contact with elbows, knees, or feet. Their coordination broke down as frustration replaced confidence. Jake made one more desperate lunge, trying to tackle her on the waist. Zoe sidestepped and helped his momentum carry him into the metal chair, which clanged loudly as it toppled over. Connor, tired of being cautious, charged straight at her with his arms spread wide. She dropped low, swept his legs, and watched him crash into the same volleyball nets that had already claimed him once. Tyler, breathing hard and nursing his ribs, backed toward the door. This is insane. She's like some kind of ninja or something. She's one person. Brittany screamed, her face red with fury and disbelief. You're telling me 3 football players can't handle one skinny Asian girl? The racist comment hung in the air like acid smoke. Zoe felt the familiar calm that came before her most decisive actions, the stillness her snow polo instructor had called the eye of the hurricane. She looked directly at Brittany, ignoring the 3 boys who were reassessing their approach. Your turn, she said quietly. Brittany's bravado cracked slightly. She'd been counting on her muscle to handle the physical aspects while she orchestrated the humiliation. Facing the actual prospect of direct confrontation clearly wasn't part of her skill set. She clutched the duct tape like a shield. You can't touch me, she said, trying to reclaim her authority. I'm student body president. If you lay one finger on me, you'll be expelled so fast your head will spin. Zoe picked up the fallen chair and set it upright with deliberate care. You're right. I can't touch you. But I can sit in this chair and wait for you to try taping me to it. The challenge was unmistakable. Brittany looked at her 3 accomplices, all of whom were showing various signs of damage from their encounters with Riverside High's supposedly helpless new girl. Jake had a bloody nose and was favoring his left side. Connor's shirt was torn, and he was picking volleyball net out of his hair. Tyler kept one arm pressed against his ribs and was breathing carefully. This isn't over, Brittany said, but her voice lacked its usual commanding tone. You think you've won something, but you have no idea what you've started. I will destroy you for this. Actually, Zoe said, settling into the chair with relaxed confidence, I think you should go ahead with your original plan. The assembly starting in 5 minutes. Don't you want to show everyone your citizenship lesson? Through the storage room walls, they could hear the gymnasium filling up with voices as students filed in for the winter formal assembly. The sound of several hundred teenagers talking and laughing created a low rumble that emphasized how isolated they were in the small room. Brittany's eyes narrowed as she tried to read Zoe's expression. Nothing about this was going according to script. The new girl should have been broken and humiliated by now, not sitting calmly in the chair like she was waiting for a routine dental appointment. What's wrong with you? Brittany demanded. Don't you understand what we were going to do to you? Tape me to this chair and wheel me out in front of the entire school to humiliate me while recording everything for social media, Zoe recited matter-of-factly. Were you planning to add commentary, or just let the visual speak for itself? The casual way she described their plan seemed to unnerve Brittany more than her fighting skills had rattled the boys. This wasn't how victims were supposed to respond. They were supposed to beg or cry, or at least show some sign that the threat had affected them. Jake wiped blood from his nose and looked at Tyler uncertainly. Maybe we should just forget this whole thing, cut our losses and leave. No, Brittany snapped. She humiliated you, all of you. Are you really going to let that stand? But the dynamic in the room had shifted completely. The boys were no longer looking at Zoe like she was prey. They were looking at her like she was a problem they didn't know how to solve. And they were looking at Brittany like she'd led them into something they hadn't signed up for. Connor touched his jaw gingerly where it had connected with the floor during his second fall. Britt, maybe Jake's right. This girl is seriously dangerous. We should probably just walk away. Walk away? Brittany's voice climbed toward hysteria. Do you understand what happens if word gets out that we couldn't handle one new girl? Our entire reputation, everything we've built here, it all falls apart. She was right, of course. High school hierarchies were fragile things, maintained more by perception than actual power. If the story spread that Brittany Walsh and her enforcers had been beaten by a quiet transfer student, the social order at Riverside High would never recover. Zoe understood this perfectly. She also understood that Brittany's desperation would make her even more dangerous than her original plan. Cornered predators didn't retreat gracefully. Here's what's going to happen, Zoe said, standing up from the chair with fluid grace. You're going to go out there and tell everyone that I'm helping with decorations, and I'll be along shortly. Then you're going to go through with your assembly as planned. Announce your winter formal court and pretend this conversation never happened. And if we don't? Tyler asked, though he didn't sound particularly eager to escalate further. Zoe walked to the door and put her hand on the handle. Then I walk out there right now and tell the entire school, all the parents, and every teacher. Exactly what you tried to do in here. I'll show them the bruises on your faces and let them draw their own conclusions about how well your plan worked out. She paused, looking back at the four of them with something that might have been pity. Or you can choose to end this now and hope I'm generous enough to keep your secrets. The silence stretched for nearly a minute while they processed their options. Through the walls, they could hear Principal Davidson's voice over the gymnasium's PA system, welcoming everyone to the winter formal assembly and asking students to take their seats. Brittany's hands were shaking as she set down the duct tape. The perfect plan that was supposed to cement her social dominance had become a disaster that threatened everything she'd worked to build. But she was also calculating, and she could see that Zoe was offering her a way out that salvaged at least some of her position. This isn't forgiveness, Brittany said finally. This is just postponement. Zoe opened the door, letting in the sound and light from the hallway. Sometimes postponement is all you get. I suggest you make the most of it. She walked out without looking back, leaving the four of them to contemplate the wreckage of their certainty that power and numbers could overcome skill and preparation. Behind her, she heard urgent whispered conversations about explanations and next moves, but those were their problems now. The hallway felt bright and spacious after the cramped storage room, and Zoe took a moment to check her appearance in the glass of a trophy case. Her clothes were slightly rumpled, but not torn, and aside from some red marks on her wrists where she'd been grabbed, there was no visible evidence of the confrontation. She could hear the assembly getting underway as she made her way toward the gymnasium entrance. Soon, she would need to decide whether to honor the truce she'd offered or to tell Marcus to proceed with whatever backup plans they'd discussed. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction at having proven a point that had needed proving for a very long time. Zoe slipped into the packed gymnasium through a side entrance, the familiar sounds of a school assembly washing over her like background music. Principal Davidson stood at the podium, adjusting his microphone while nearly 800 students filled the bleachers in their typical social formations. She spotted Marcus in the debate team section, his phone discreetly positioned and his eyes scanning the room with nervous energy. The winter formal court nominations were already underway when Brittany appeared from the opposite entrance, her three companions trailing behind her like wounded soldiers. Even from across the gymnasium, Zoe could see the careful way Tyler held his arm and the tissue Jake kept pressing to his nose. Connor had managed to finger comb his hair back into some semblance of order, but his torn shirt was tucked in awkwardly to hide the damage. Brittany herself moved with the rigid posture of someone fighting to maintain composure. Her perfect smile was back in place, but it didn't reach her eyes, and she kept glancing toward the storage room door like she expected Zoe to burst through it with evidence of their encounter. When she took her place among the student council, representatives on the gymnasium floor. Her usual commanding presence seemed diminished. "And now," Principal Davidson announced, "our student body president Brittany Walsh will present this year's winter formal theme options." Brittany approached the microphone with measured steps, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded her prepared remarks. The irony wasn't lost on Zoe that this moment was supposed to have been Brittany's triumph, the perfect setup for publicly destroying her newest victim. Instead, she was struggling to deliver a routine presentation while her intended victim watched from the audience, completely unrestrained and clearly unbroken. "Thank you, Principal Davidson," Brittany began, her voice carrying its usual authority but lacking the underlying confidence that made people listen. "This year's Winter Formal Committee has selected 3 potential themes for your consideration." As she spoke about winter wonderlands and vintage glamour, whispers began spreading through the gymnasium. Students were noticing the condition of Tyler, Jake, and Connor, the way they sat stiffly and avoided looking at each other. Social media was already buzzing with speculation about what had happened to Riverside High's golden boys. Emma Patterson, a junior who'd witnessed Tyler's bloody nose when he'd briefly appeared in the hallway earlier, posted a photo with the caption, "What happened to Tyler Morrison?" Within minutes, the post had dozens of comments offering theories ranging from car accidents to Fight Club participation. Marcus caught Zoe's eye from across the gymnasium and raised an eyebrow in a silent question. She gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head, indicating that his recording services wouldn't be needed. The decision to honor her offered truce was tactical rather than merciful. Sometimes the most devastating victory was the one your opponent had to live with in silence. But Riverside High's social ecosystem was too interconnected for secrets to survive long. By the time Brittany finished her presentation and the voting began, at least a dozen students had connected the dots between the storage room location, the timing, and the obvious physical evidence. The rumor mill that Brittany had weaponized so effectively against previous targets was now turning its attention to her. Samantha Torres, the girl whose near-fatal allergic reaction had been buried by administrative indifference, sat in the senior section watching Brittany struggle through the presentation with undisguised satisfaction. She'd transferred back to Riverside just this semester after her family's return from Phoenix, bringing with her a detailed understanding of how Brittany operated and no remaining fear of the consequences. When the assembly ended and students began filing out, Samantha made her way through the crowd towards Zoe with purposeful determination. They'd never spoken before, but shared experience created instant recognition between them. "New girl," Samantha said, falling into step beside Zoe as they moved toward the exit. "I'm guessing your first few weeks have been interesting." Zoe studied the older girl's face, noting the carefully concealed scars along her jawline and the way she carried herself like someone who'd learned not to trust easy friendships. "Samantha Torres, Marcus told me about what happened to you. Did he also tell you that I've been documenting everything since I came back? Every incident, every pattern, every cover-up?" Samantha's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. "I came back here for a reason, and it wasn't to finish my senior year quietly." They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the main hallway, where clusters of students were engaged in animated discussions about winter formal plans and the mysterious condition of Brittany's usual crew. The social dynamics were shifting in real time as people reassessed power structures they'd taken for granted. "You know she's not going to let this go," Samantha said quietly. "Brittany Walsh doesn't forgive challenges to her authority, and what happened in that storage room, whatever it was, represents the biggest challenge she's ever faced." Zoe nodded, watching Tyler limp past them with obvious discomfort. "I'm counting on it. People like Brittany make their biggest mistakes when they're desperate to prove they're still in control." The next few days proved Zoe's prediction accurate. Unable to retaliate directly without admitting what had happened in the storage room, Brittany launched a more subtle campaign designed to isolate Zoe through social pressure and institutional manipulation. She convinced friendly teachers to assign group projects that excluded the new girl, organized study sessions that pointedly didn't include her, and spread whispers about her family's background that painted them as suspicious outsiders. But the campaign backfired spectacularly. Students who'd been terrified of Brittany's power for years suddenly realized she was vulnerable. Marcus organized a counter-narrative through the debate team network, subtly spreading the word that Zoe had faced down Brittany's intimidation and emerged victorious. The story grew in the telling, becoming legend as it passed from group to group. Sarah Kim, a sophomore who'd been one of Brittany's earliest targets, found the courage to speak openly about her own harassment experiences. David Martinez, whose academic scholarship had been threatened when he'd refused to write Brittany's English papers, started collecting testimonies from other victims. Even some of Brittany's former allies began distancing themselves as they realized the tide was turning. The breaking point came exactly 1 week after the storage room confrontation. Connor Reed, still nursing a bruised ego along with his physical injuries, made the mistake of cornering Zoe near her locker during the lunch period. His approach was meant to look casual, but his clenched fists and aggressive posture attracted immediate attention from nearby students. "You think you're pretty clever," he said loudly enough for everyone in the hallway to hear. "Walking around here like you own the place now." Zoe closed her locker with deliberate calm and turned to face him. A crowd was already forming, phones appearing as students sensed drama about to unfold. "I think I'm a student trying to get to lunch. Is there something you needed, Connor?" "Yeah, I need you to understand that what happened the other day doesn't change anything. You got lucky once, but that luck's going to run out." The threat was clear enough that several students started recording, recognizing they were witnessing either Connor's redemption or his destruction. Marcus appeared at the edge of the crowd, his own phone discreetly positioned to capture everything. Zoe stepped closer to Connor, close enough that the microphones on nearby phones would pick up. Her words clearly, "Are you threatening me, Connor? Because last time you tried to intimidate me, you ended up face first in a pile of volleyball nets." The crowd erupted in surprised laughter and excited whispers. Connor's face flushed red as he realized his attempt at private intimidation had become public entertainment. "You can't prove anything happened in that room." "I don't need to prove anything," Zoe said calmly. "Your face tells the whole story." She gestured toward the fading bruise on his jaw and the careful way he held his left shoulder. The physical evidence was obvious to anyone who looked closely, and now that she'd drawn attention to it, everyone was looking very closely indeed. Connor realized he'd walked into a trap. Any escalation would only confirm the story Zoe was telling, while backing down would humiliate him in front of the entire school. He chose the worst possible option and tried to grab her arm, apparently forgetting how their last physical encounter had ended. Zoe stepped aside and let his momentum carry him past her, then helped him along with a gentle push that sent him stumbling into the row of lockers with a loud, metallic crash. The crowd cheered as Connor tried to regain his balance and his dignity, simultaneously failing at both. "Like I said," Zoe announced to the crowd, "luck has nothing to do with it." The video went viral before Connor made it to the nurse's office. Someone uploaded it to TikTok with the caption, "New girl school's basketball player again," and within hours, it had spread beyond Riverside High to neighboring schools and social networks. The comment section filled with students from other districts, sharing their own stories about privileged bullies getting their comeuppance. Principal Davidson, faced with undeniable video evidence of harassment and assault, was forced to take action he'd avoided for years. Connor received a 3-day suspension and was removed from the basketball team pending a full investigation. Tyler and Jake, implicated by association and their obvious injuries, faced similar consequences. But the real blow to Brittany's empire came from an unexpected source. Her own boyfriend, Tyler Morrison, cracked under the pressure of increasing scrutiny and his father's furious reaction to the negative publicity surrounding the family name. During his disciplinary hearing, he admitted to the planned assault in the storage room and provided details about previous harassment campaigns Brittany had orchestrated. The revelation opened floodgates that had been held back by fear for years. Student after student came forward with documented evidence of Brittany's systematic cruelty. Teachers who'd been pressured to ignore complaints finally spoke up about administrative interference. Parents who'd been told their children were oversensitive demanded accountability from the school board. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, Zoe's mother, attended the emergency school board meeting not as a concerned parent, but as a pediatrician who'd treated victims of severe bullying in multiple countries. Her presentation about the long-term psychological effects of institutional harassment was devastating in its clinical precision. "What you've allowed to happen at Riverside High isn't typical teenage drama," she told the packed auditorium. "It's systematic abuse enabled by administrative neglect. The physical evidence documented in these incidents represents only the visible symptoms of trauma that will affect these children for years." David Chen, with his diplomatic experience, helped organize parents into an effective advocacy group that demanded transparency and reform. His translator skills proved useful in helping immigrant families who'd been intimidated into silence find their voices and share their experiences. Brittany Walsh resigned from student government on a Tuesday morning, citing family obligations and college preparation. Her letter to the school newspaper was brief and offered no apology, but everyone understood it was an admission of defeat. She finished the semester attending classes but no longer commanding them. Her social circle reduced to a handful of loyalists who clung to the wreckage of her former influence. The transformation at Riverside High wasn't immediate, but it was unmistakable. New policies required documented evidence for any disciplinary actions, mandatory training for faculty on recognizing harassment patterns, and anonymous reporting systems that couldn't be buried by administrative convenience. Dr. Foster, the new principal who replaced Davidson after his quiet resignation, came from an urban district where she'd successfully dismantled similar power structures. Marcus Thompson was elected student body president in a special election, running on a platform of accountability and inclusion that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. His first initiative was establishing a peer mediation program that trained students to recognize and interrupt bullying before it escalated to crisis levels. Samantha Torres, instead of transferring again, stayed to graduate and used her senior project to create a comprehensive documentary about institutional harassment and recovery. The film featured interviews with victims, reformed perpetrators, and administrators who explained how systems designed to protect students could be corrupted by social pressure and financial interests. Zoe became something of a legend at Riverside High, though she wore the reputation lightly. Students who'd been invisible for years found the courage to speak up, knowing they had allies who wouldn't abandon them when things got difficult. Her quiet confidence became a model for others who'd learned to hide their strength to avoid becoming targets. The real measure of change came 6 months later when another new student arrived at Riverside High. Jennifer Walsh, Brittany's younger cousin, entered as a sophomore with all the privilege and attitude her family name suggested. But instead of automatically inheriting social dominance, she found herself in a school where kindness mattered more than connections, where strength was measured by character rather than cruelty. Jennifer's first attempt at establishing her hierarchy through intimidation was met with calm resistance from students who'd learned they didn't have to accept abuse as the price of education. Her second attempt was recorded and reported through channels that actually functioned. By her third week, she was sitting alone at lunch, learning the hard lesson that fear-based power doesn't transfer between generations. Zoe found her there, One Thursday afternoon, picking at a sandwich while scrolling through social media that no longer celebrated her family's influence. "Mind if I sit here?" Jennifer looked up with surprise and suspicion. "Why would you want to sit with me?" "Everyone knows you're the one who destroyed my cousin." "I didn't destroy Brittany," Zoe said, settling into the chair across from her. "She destroyed herself. I just refused to let her destroy me too." They sat in silence for a few minutes, Jennifer processing this perspective while Zoe waited patiently. Finally, the younger girl set down her phone and really looked at Zoe for the first time. "What's it like?" Jennifer asked quietly. "Being strong enough that people can't hurt you?" Zoe considered the question seriously. "It's not about being strong enough that people can't hurt you. It's about being strong enough to choose how you respond when they try." Jennifer Walsh stared at her half-eaten sandwich while processing Zoe's words about choosing responses rather than avoiding pain. The cafeteria buzzed with normal teenage conversation around them, but their corner table felt isolated from the social dynamics that had once determined everything at Riverside High. "I used to watch Brittany control everything," Jennifer said finally. "She made it look so easy, like she was born knowing exactly how to make people do what she wanted. I thought that's just how you survived high school." Zoe unwrapped her own lunch, giving Jennifer space to continue without pressure. She'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply listen without judgment while someone worked through their own realizations. "My parents sent me here thinking I'd automatically inherit her position," Jennifer continued. "They kept talking about family legacy and maintaining our reputation. But watching what happened to her, seeing how quickly everything fell apart, when people stopped being afraid, it made me realize that kind of power isn't real power at all." The admission carried weight beyond typical teenage angst. Jennifer was grappling with the collapse of her entire worldview. The understanding that everything her family had taught her about social dynamics was not only wrong but destructive. For someone raised to believe dominance was natural and necessary. Recognizing the emptiness of that philosophy required genuine courage. "Real power comes from making people better, not making them smaller," Zoe said quietly. "It took me years to understand that myself." Over the following weeks, Jennifer Walsh became an unexpected case study in redemption. Unlike her cousin, who'd left Riverside carrying resentment and blame, Jennifer chose the harder path of honest self-examination. She approached students she'd initially tried to intimidate and offered genuine apologies that didn't excuse her behavior or expect immediate forgiveness. Marcus Thompson, now settling into his role as student body president, worked with Jennifer to create a mentorship program pairing upperclassmen with new students. The initiative was designed to help newcomers navigate Riverside's social landscape without falling into old patterns of hierarchy and exclusion. "The thing about bullying," Marcus explained during one of their planning sessions, "is that it's often about people feeling powerless in their own lives and trying to regain control by making others feel even more powerless. But if we can help people find positive ways to feel influential and important, they don't need to tear others down." Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. Brittany always talked about teaching people lessons, but the only lesson was that she could hurt you if she wanted to. That's not teaching anything useful. The mentorship program launched in February with 20 upperclassmen volunteers, paired with recent transfer students and freshmen who were struggling socially. Jennifer worked specifically with kids who reminded her of her former self, helping them understand that belonging didn't require making others feel excluded. One of her mentees was David Restrepo, a quiet sophomore whose family had moved from Columbia mid-semester. His limited English and shy demeanor had made him an obvious target for the kind of casual cruelty that Riverside High was trying to eliminate. Jennifer spent hours helping him with homework, introducing him to clubs that matched his interests, and teaching him the unspoken social codes that could protect him from predatory behavior. "Why are you helping me?" David asked one afternoon. as they worked on an English essay together in the library. "You don't know me, and I can't do anything for you." Jennifer paused in her explanation of thesis statements, recognizing the transactional thinking that had once dominated her own worldview. "Because when I was hurting people, it made me feel terrible inside, even when I pretended it made me feel powerful. But helping you with this essay makes me feel genuinely good about myself." Turns out being useful is better than being feared. The transformation wasn't limited to Jennifer. Throughout the spring semester, Riverside High continued, evolving in ways that surprised even the most optimistic reformers. The theater department, previously considered social suicide for anyone with mainstream ambitions, suddenly found itself flooded with new members as students discovered they could explore creative interests without facing ridicule. Ashley Patel, a junior who'd spent 2 years hiding her passion for stagecraft to avoid social exile, finally auditioned for the spring musical and earned the lead role. Her performance in Into the Woods was so compelling that several college scouts attended specifically to evaluate her talent, leading to scholarship offers that wouldn't have existed if she'd continued prioritizing social safety over personal authenticity. The robotics team, once mocked as an assembly of outcasts, gained respect when their innovation in autonomous navigation systems earned recognition at state competition. Team captain Michael Torres, Samantha's younger brother, found himself invited to social events not because of his sister's notoriety, but because his engineering skills had proven genuinely impressive to classmates who'd learned to value substance over superficial coolness. Samantha herself used her final semester to complete her documentary project, which she titled The Anatomy of Institutional Cruelty, a case study in systemic change. The film premiered at a special assembly in March, with students, faculty, and community members filling the gymnasium to capacity. The documentary didn't sensationalize the events at Riverside High, but instead provided thoughtful analysis of how harassment cultures develop and persist when institutions prioritize reputation over protection. Samantha interviewed former victims, reformed perpetrators, and administrators from multiple school districts to create a comprehensive examination of bullying as a systemic rather than individual problem. One of the most powerful segments featured Tyler Morrison, now a senior at a different school after his family moved following the scandal. His on-camera confession was raw with genuine remorse as he explained how peer pressure and family expectations had led him to participate in activities he knew were wrong. "I told myself I was just following Brittany's lead, that I wasn't really responsible for what happened," Tyler said, his voice cracking slightly. "But watching that footage of Zoe hanging from the rope we tied, seeing how scared she must have been even though she didn't show it, I realized I was just as guilty as anyone else. Maybe more, because I knew better and did it anyway." The documentary's most profound insight came from Dr. Elizabeth Chen, who provided psychological context for the behavioral patterns documented throughout the film. Her clinical analysis helped viewers understand that cruelty often stemmed from trauma and insecurity rather than inherent evil, making rehabilitation possible for those willing to engage in honest self-reflection. "Hurt people," Dr. Chen explained, but that cycle can be broken when institutions create accountability structures that address root causes rather than just punishing symptoms. Real change requires helping perpetrators understand the impact of their actions, while simultaneously protecting potential victims from ongoing harm. The documentary's premiere sparked conversations that extended far beyond Riverside High. The county school board voted to implement similar accountability measures district-wide, and the state education department requested copies for use in administrator training programs. Samantha received inquiries from film festivals and universities impressed by her mature approach to complex social issues. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from Elena Martinez, a 8th grader from nearby Jefferson Middle School who attended the premiere with her parents. Elena had been experiencing harassment that eerily paralleled Zoe's early experiences at Riverside, and watching the documentary gave her family the vocabulary and framework to advocate effectively for intervention. Seeing how Zoe handled everything made me realize I didn't have to just endure it, Alina told Samantha after the screening. And seeing how the school actually changed gave my parents hope that complaining might actually accomplish something instead of just making things worse. Elena's situation was resolved within weeks through the new protocols inspired by Riverside's transformation. The middle school administration, trained in recognizing systematic harassment patterns, conducted a thorough investigation that revealed a network of 8th grade students engaging in coordinated bullying. Rather than simply suspending the perpetrators, they implemented a restorative justice program that required the harassers to understand the impact of their actions and develop empathy for their victims. Meanwhile, Zoe had settled into a leadership role that felt natural rather than imposed. Her reputation for quiet strength attracted students facing various forms of adversity, from academic struggles to family problems to identity conflicts. She never positioned herself as a counselor or authority figure, but her willingness to listen without judgment created a safe space for people to work through their challenges. One surprising friendship developed with Carmen Rodriguez, a freshman, whose anxiety disorder had made her previous school experience traumatic. Carmen's panic attacks and social phobias had labeled her as difficult at her former school, where teachers and administrators treated her symptoms as behavioral problems, rather than medical conditions requiring accommodation. "I was terrified of starting high school," Carmen confided during one of their regular library study sessions. "Everyone said it would be worse than middle school, that I'd never survive if I couldn't even handle 8th grade without having breakdowns." Zoe helped Carmen navigate the social complexities of high school while advocating for appropriate accommodations with teachers who didn't understand anxiety disorders. She also introduced Carmen to breathing techniques and grounding exercises she'd learned during her martial arts training, practical tools that complemented Carmen's therapeutic treatment. "The weird thing is," Carmen said one afternoon as they walked to her therapy appointment, "I actually feel safer here than I did at my old school. People don't use your weaknesses against you anymore. They just accept that everyone's dealing with something." The cultural shift at Riverside High had indeed created an environment where vulnerability was met with support rather than exploitation. Students felt comfortable seeking help for learning disabilities, mental health issues, family problems, and identity questions without fear that their struggles would become weapons in someone else's social warfare. This transformation became particularly evident during the school's first Pride Week celebration in April. Previous attempts to recognize LGBTQ+ students had been quietly discouraged by administrators worried about community backlash, but new leadership embraced the opportunity to demonstrate their commitment to inclusivity. The week featured educational presentations, guest speakers, and student-organized activities designed to promote understanding and acceptance. Rather than generating the controversy previous administrators had feared, the events drew enthusiastic participation from students eager to learn about their classmates' experiences and challenges. Alex Thompson, Marcus's younger sibling who used they/them pronouns, organized a panel discussion about gender identity that attracted a standing room-only audience. The presentation addressed common questions and misconceptions with patience and humor, helping classmates understand experiences that many had never encountered before. 2 years ago, I couldn't even use the bathroom at school without getting harassed, Alex shared during the panel. Kids would follow me just to make comments about which restroom I belonged in. But now people just see me as Alex from the drama club who's really good at lighting design. My gender identity is part of who I am, but it's not the only thing that matters about me. The panel also featured Santiago Valdez, a senior whose journey from closeted athlete to openly gay student leader illustrated how the school's transformation had enabled authentic self-expression. Santiago's coming-out story resonated particularly strongly with students who'd been hiding aspects of their identity to avoid social consequences. I spent 3 years pretending to be someone I wasn't, because I thought being gay would end my social life and my baseball career, Santiago explained. But when I finally came out last fall, I discovered that most people just wanted me to be happy. The few who had problems with it found themselves pretty isolated, because harassment isn't tolerated here anymore. The success of Pride Week led to similar celebrations recognizing other forms of diversity throughout the remaining school year. Cultural Heritage Month featured presentations from students representing dozens of different backgrounds, sharing traditions, foods, and perspectives that enriched everyone's understanding of their community's complexity. Zoe contributed a presentation about third culture kids, students who'd grown up moving between countries and cultures, without belonging completely to any single identity. Her discussion of the challenges and advantages of cultural flexibility helped classmates understand experiences that had previously seemed impossibly exotic. People always ask where I'm really from, Zoe explained to the engaged audience. But the honest answer is that I'm from everywhere and nowhere. Move-in constantly taught me to adapt quickly and read social situations carefully. But it also meant I never felt like I belonged anywhere until I learned to create belonging through connection rather than conformity. The presentation sparked conversations about belonging and identity that continued long after the formal program ended. Students who'd felt isolated by their own complex backgrounds found community with others navigating similar challenges, while those from more traditional situations gained appreciation for different forms of strength and resilience. As spring turned towards summer and graduation approached, the changes at Riverside High had become so integrated into daily life that it was hard to remember how differently things had operated just months earlier. The toxic hierarchies that had once determined social value had been replaced by more organic communities based on shared interests, mutual support, and genuine friendship. The senior class, preparing for their final weeks together, reflected on their transformation with mixture of pride and amazement. Many admitted they barely recognized the school they were leaving compared to the one they'd attended for 3.5 years before Zoe's arrival. I was talking to my cousin who goes to Westbrook High, said Jessica Kim during their final student government meeting. And she was describing all this drama about social rankings and who's allowed to sit where at lunch. I tried to explain how we do things here now, and she thought I was making it up. She couldn't believe a high school could actually function without those kinds of power games. Marcus, preparing to hand over student government leadership to next year's elected officers, used his final presidential address to reflect on the year's changes. Standing at the same podium where Brittany had once announced her winter formal plans, he spoke to an audience that included many faces that would have been invisible in that same gymnasium just 12 months earlier. When we started this year, a lot of us accepted cruelty as normal because we'd never experienced anything different, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the quiet auditorium. We thought social hierarchies were natural laws instead of artificial constructions that we had the power to change. But this year proved that schools can be different when students choose to make them different. He paused, looking out at faces that reflected the diversity and authenticity that had emerged over the past months. The most important thing we learned is that everyone has something valuable to contribute when they're given the chance to be their authentic selves. We're graduating with not just academic knowledge, but with proof that positive change is possible when people choose courage over comfort. The graduating class voted unanimously to dedicate their yearbook to the quiet strength that creates lasting change, a recognition of how individual courage could transform entire communities. The dedication page featured a photo of the empty storage room where Zoe's confrontation with Brittany had taken place, now converted into a peer mediation center where students worked through conflicts with trained facilitators. Zoe herself was selected as graduation speaker by her classmates, despite having attended Riverside for less than a full academic year. Her acceptance speech, delivered to the packed football stadium on a warm June evening, focused on the potential for growth and change that existed within every community. When I arrived at Riverside High, I expected to spend a quiet year preparing for college while staying out of whatever social dynamics already existed. Zoe told the audience of graduates, families, and community members, "I never intended to challenge anyone or change anything. But sometimes life puts you in situations where staying silent means allowing harm to continue. And speaking up requires more courage than you think you possess." She paused, scanning the crowd until she found her parents in the stands, their faces glowing with pride. The most important lesson I learned this year wasn't taught in any classroom. I learned that individual actions can create ripple effects that transform entire communities, but only if people choose to support positive change, instead of just hoping someone else will solve their problems. The speech continued with reflections on the collective nature of social transformation, acknowledging the contributions of students like Marcus, Samantha, Jennifer, and dozens of others who'd chosen to build something better rather than accept something broken. Zoe concluded with a challenge that had become her signature approach to difficult situations. As you leave Riverside High and enter college, careers, and adult communities, you'll encounter new forms of injustice and cruelty. Some will be subtle, others obvious. All will present you with the same choice you faced here: accept the status quo because it's easier, or invest the energy required to create something better. I hope this year taught you that the investment is always worth making. The graduation ceremony concluded with traditional cap throwing and family photographs. But the conversations continued long into the evening as people reflected on the year's transformation. Parents who'd initially been skeptical of the administrative changes found themselves grateful for a school environment where their children could thrive authentically. Teachers discovered they enjoyed their profession more when classroom management focused on building community rather than maintaining control through fear. Dr. Foster, the principal who'd inherited a crisis and transformed it into an opportunity, used her closing remarks to announce that Riverside High had been selected as a model program for the state education department's anti-bullying initiative. Schools throughout the region would send administrators and counselors to observe their systems and adapt their approaches to local circumstances. "Change is possible," Dr. Foster told the assembled crowd. "But it requires everyone's commitment, not just good intentions from a few dedicated individuals." This graduating class proved that students can lead transformation when adults provide appropriate support and structure. As summer began and students scattered to various colleges, jobs, and gap year adventures, the impact of their senior year continued reverberating through their new communities. Zoe headed to MIT with a full scholarship and plans to study conflict resolution technology, applying her interest in martial arts precision to digital systems designed to identify and interrupt harassment patterns before they escalated. Marcus received admission to Georgetown School of Foreign Service, planning to combine his debate skills with international relations training in hopes of eventually working in diplomatic conflict resolution. His acceptance letter specifically mentioned his leadership during Riverside High's transformation as evidence of his potential for creating positive change in complex situations. Samantha's documentary earned her admission to NYU's film school with a scholarship specifically designated for students using media to address social justice issues. Several film festivals had already requested screening rights, and a streaming service had expressed interest in distributing the documentary as part of their educational content library. Even Jennifer Walsh found her path forward shaped by her year of growth and redemption. Her mentorship work with immigrant students had sparked an interest in social work, leading to admission at the University of Texas with plans to specialize in school-based intervention programs. Her college application essay about learning to use privilege constructively rather than destructively had moved admissions counselors to tears. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of change came from the incoming freshman class that fall. Elena Martinez, the middle school student who'd been inspired by the documentary premiere, entered Riverside High as part of a cohort that expected safety, inclusion, and authentic community as basic rights rather than special privileges. Elena's confidence during freshman orientation week illustrated how completely the school's culture had shifted. She introduced herself to classmates without fear, joined clubs based on genuine interest rather than social calculation, and approached teachers with questions instead of strategic deference. Her comfort in her new environment reflected the secure foundation that previous students had built through their courage and determination. The incoming class also included refugees, military children, and other students whose complex backgrounds would have once made them targets for exclusion or harassment. Instead, they found mentors, friends, and communities that valued their unique perspectives and experiences. The diversity that had once been seen as threatening to social stability was now recognized as essential to educational richness. Zoe's influence at Riverside High continued even after her graduation through the systems and culture changes she'd helped inspire. The peer mediation program expanded to include conflict resolution training for all students, teaching everyone basic skills for addressing problems before they required administrative intervention. The mentorship program grew to include academic, social, and career guidance components that helped students navigate challenges throughout their high school experience. Most importantly, the school had developed institutional memory of its transformation. Ensuring that future generations would understand how their positive environment had been created and maintained. New students learned about the school's history not as ancient legend, but as recent proof that positive change remained possible when people chose courage over comfort. The story of Riverside High's transformation spread beyond educational circles, inspiring similar changes in workplaces, community organizations, and other institutions where hierarchical cruelty had been accepted as inevitable. Zoe's approach of combining personal strength with systematic documentation provided a replicable model for individuals facing institutional indifference to harassment and abuse. Several universities requested copies of Samantha's documentary for use in education and social work programs, recognizing its value as both historical document and practical guide for creating positive change. The film's emphasis on collective action rather than individual heroism resonated with viewers, seeking sustainable approaches to community transformation. 5 years later, Zoe returned to Riverside High as a guest speaker during their annual Courage and Community Week, an event that had grown from the original Pride Week celebration into a comprehensive exploration of social justice issues. The gymnasium where she'd once faced down Brittany's intimidation was now filled with confident students eager to learn from her experiences. "The most important thing to understand," she told the attentive audience, "is that what happened here wasn't magic or luck. It was the result of individual people making difficult choices repeatedly until those choices became community habits. Every day, you have opportunities to choose inclusion over exclusion, support over cruelty, truth over convenient silence." She paused, looking around the room at faces that represented the diversity and authenticity that had emerged from their collective commitment to positive change. The question isn't whether you're brave enough to be a hero in one dramatic moment. The question is whether you're committed enough to make good choices consistently, even when no one's watching, and especially when those choices require personal sacrifice. After her presentation, Zoe toured the school with current student leaders who'd grown up in the culture their predecessors had created. The storage room where her confrontation with Brittany had taken place was now a meditation and quiet reflection space, decorated with student artwork celebrating growth, healing, and community connection. The transformation felt complete, but Zoe understood it required constant maintenance. Each new class brought students who hadn't experienced the previous culture of fear and exclusion, making it essential to continuously teach the values and practices that sustained their positive environment. Change wasn't a destination, but an ongoing choice that every community member had to make repeatedly. As she prepared to leave Riverside High after her visit, Zoe reflected on how her experience there had shaped her subsequent work in conflict resolution technology. The skills she'd developed for reading social dynamics, documenting evidence, and building coalitions had proven invaluable in designing systems that could identify and interrupt harassment patterns in digital environments. Her latest project involved creating artificial intelligence tools that could analyze communication patterns to flag potential bullying situations before they escalated to crisis levels. The technology was being tested in schools across 3 states, with promising early results in reducing both the frequency and severity of harassment incidents. But technology was only part of the solution. Real change still required human beings, choosing courage over comfort, inclusion over exclusion, truth over convenient silence. The systems could provide support and documentation, but they couldn't replace the fundamental choice each person faced when confronted with injustice and cruelty. Standing in the Riverside High parking lot where she'd once sat in her car preparing for confrontation, Zoe smiled at how different everything felt now. The building looked the same, but the energy was completely transformed. Students walked with confidence, laughed without fear, and engaged with each other authentically rather than strategically. The quiet girl who'd once documented harassment while planning her defense had become a woman whose work protected countless others from similar experiences. But the most satisfying part wasn't the technology or recognition or professional success. It was knowing that her choices had created ripple effects that continued expanding, touching lives she'd never meet in communities she'd never visit. Real strength, she'd learned, wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about using your own experiences of pain and recovery to build systems that protected others from unnecessary suffering. It was about transforming trauma into wisdom, isolation into community, fear into possibility. The story that had begun with duct tape and intimidation had become something much larger, proof that individual courage could create collective transformation when people chose to build something better rather than accept something broken. And in schools, workplaces, and communities across the country, that proof continued inspiring others to make the same choice, one difficult decision at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.